now introduce our first speaker of the day, Michele Solomon from the Ontario Native Women's Association. Michele will be speaking about reconciliation with Indigenous women. And Michele is the Community Development Manager at the Ontario Native Women's Association. And in her role as Community Development Manager, Michele leads programs focused on Indigenous women's leadership. And she's also served on Onawa's board of directors from 1988 to 1993. She's a member and elected councillor for Fort William First Nation in her third term of office, a proud mother and grandmother, and she earned her BA in Indigenous Learning degree from Lakehead University and a social service worker diploma from Confederate College. One of her many roles as a counselor is to provide guidance and knowledge towards a substantial portfolio area for the First Nation, which includes health, community service, finance and administration, and youth and social development. Michele's main area of expertise is mental health and addictions, stemming from her many years of employment as a team leader and manager at Delico and Anishinaabe Family Care and Health Center manager for White Cedar. And from her background in these areas, it has allowed her to obtain a strong knowledge of opioid addiction and treatment. Michele, thank you for joining us today and being here with us to share your experiences and your knowledge and to talk about reconciliation with Indigenous women. Please go ahead.
Good morning, Ani Boju. Ashki Mekana Ikwe Dejnikas. As I've been introduced as well, I'm Michele Solomon from Fort William First Nation. I've been working with the Ontario Native Women's Association in this capacity for nearly 4 years now. For those of you who don't know a lot about the Ontario Native Women's Association, it's an organization that's been around for 50 years now. You know, their work is really the foundation of all of the work that they do is about Indigenous women and the experiences of dealing with racism, discrimination, and not just, from all areas of government and services. And so that's really the report that the Ontario Native Women's Association developed. I will speak a little bit to it this morning. I've sent a copy of it to the organizers of this event so that that can be shared with you, and it's of course also on our website. I'm grateful to be here with you this morning and have this opportunity to talk about this work, to talk about this issue. It's so important that these conversations continue to happen and that we continue to look for ways to address the situation of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Before I get into the presentation, I would like to acknowledge missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and acknowledge any family members that might be with us today. I'd also like to share something that was shared with me in this work by a family member, which I took very seriously and I took very much to heart. I was told in a session that if I'm going to be talking about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, that there should be a fire happening. I don't have a fire, but if I don't have a fire, I always make sure to have a candle burning when I'm having these conversations to represent fire, to acknowledge and respect the information that was shared with me about doing this work and making sure that I'm doing it in a good way. And I share that with you so that you can do the same if you choose to, but that was impactful for me. So changing the narrative of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, that is the subtitle of the report. So the Ontario Native Women's Association would like to acknowledge all of the courageous Indigenous women who continue to speak out on the violence they experience and their shared stories about their families or lost loved ones, and who bravely continue to bring this issue to the forefront. We admire these women for their tireless grassroots efforts, no matter how often they thought that they were unheard. Much of the work of sharing stories, voices, and raising awareness outside of the national inquiry was done without recognition or funding. Despite these challenges, Indigenous women continue to do the work. Without the kindness and love of elders, knowledge keepers, and healers who carry and support Indigenous women, the work could not be completed. The work could not continue. They remind us to take care of each other while we do the work because it is heavy and hard. Helpers remind us that the way forward is through ceremony. Ceremony is a way that families find the healing needed to cope with the loss of their loved ones and honor the lives that have gone on. For many Indigenous peoples, ceremony is the answer to their many questions. The way we become whole again is by participating in ceremony to activate our healing journey from the historical and ongoing trauma rooted in violence against Indigenous women. We want to acknowledge the many unrecognized Indigenous women leaders who guided us to this point to develop a national action plan that addresses the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. So, as I said, we've been in existence for 50 years, so since 1971. Onawa has been led by strong Indigenous women who have worked on addressing issues that Indigenous women experience. We are focused on supporting women to take up their leadership roles in the family and in the community. Why are we focused on Indigenous women? Women is the center of the wheel of life. She is the heartbeat of the people. She is not just in the home, but she is the community. She is nation. One of our grandmothers, the woman is the foundation on which nations are built. She is the heart of her nation. If that heart is weak, the people are weak. If her heart is strong and her mind is clear, then the nation is strong and knows its purpose. The woman is the center of everything. And that's part of a poem by Art Solomon. To step back for just a second, initially I had sent a PowerPoint that was completely about the report, but I feel like it's important to talk about the work that has been happening within the Ontario Native Women's Association and some of the work that we continue to do in the area of missing murdered Indigenous women and girls. The report is a lot of information. I think it's probably good to for reading later. This is more of an overview of the work that we do and some of the things that we believe were in this work. Our journey of the groundbreaking reports that really brought to light the violence against women in our communities in Canada, in across the globe, is the 1980 Breaking Free Report, a proposal for change to Aboriginal family violence. And I was actually, I was part of the organization at that time, and I was a really young woman. And this information, after talking to grassroots women, was just, when you finally start talking about it and documenting it, to know how many of our women were experiencing violence was phenomenal and astounding, truly. Following that, I mean, these are other foundational reports that events that happened. 2007, there was a summit to end violence against Aboriginal women. 2008 to 15, there was a total of 5 summits focused on addressing violence. 2015, of course, the TRC calls to action, particularly action number 41. 2015, the announcement of the inquiry. 2019, the final report into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Again, foundational work that we can build on or use in our work. The Reconciliation with Indigenous Women report we released in 2020. And then in 2020, also started the Indigenous Women Safety Table. And what's needed? Capacity. We know that capacity building is needed at every level. At the individual level, it's focused on safety, healing, and supportive services. At the organizational level, strategic planning, community engagement, accreditation, strong governance at a policy decision-making, and role modeling leadership. And at the community level, engagement, rebuilding relationship, and working together. So these were Onawa's recommendations to the National Inquiry. Restoration of Indigenous women's identity, of course, speaking to the sex discrimination in the Indian Act that really, removed our identity as Indigenous women. Restoration and recognition of Indigenous women's leadership, language, addressing sexual violence against Indigenous women and girls, victim services and safety, Indigenous women and the Gladue principles, addressing human trafficking against Indigenous women and girls, restoring healthy families and addressing the child welfare system, reinstatement of the Aboriginal Healing Foundation, Indigenous gender-based analysis, and investments in Indigenous women's capacity and leadership. And it sounds like, looking at your agenda this week, a lot of conversation has happened about some of these things. In addressing the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and creating solutions to address violence perpetrated against them, there needs to be a direct increase in responsibility and accountability at all levels of community agencies and government. It is time for leaders and policymakers to actively listen and empower the voices of Indigenous women and girls. As Indigenous women, we must take up our roles and responsibilities as leaders of communities. We must work collaboratively in order to effectively find solutions for change to occur. And that was part of the statement that was made by Onawa to the National Inquiry. So, in our missing murdered Indigenous women and girls work, it consists of supporting families, offering traditional healing opportunities, cultural reconnection, creating safe spaces, and bringing the impact on family members has been tremendous. Each family that receives support is always very grateful for any help that they receive in honoring their loved one. Some of the requests that we do have involve families wanting to travel to events where their loved one was murdered or went missing in the hopes of finding something out or meeting someone who may know something. It's common for families that access from Onawa to continue to seek answers on what happened to their family members, but that information is not usually forthcoming. What comes instead is the building of a support system. On was honored to be able to support families to gather, and in doing so, they also find strength in each other's messages. Attending events for MMIW is crucial to their healing. Families of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls begin or continue the healing journey while carrying on the memory of their loved ones. Many family members that attend events do so as the voice of their missing or murdered loved one. Through culture and ceremony, these families are developing bonds with others who know the experience, not only to support each other, but also to walk hand in hand and work passionately to raise awareness to never let this happen to future generations. Many family members don't have access to healing through culture, ceremony, and sometimes, as we know, there's a lack of understanding of tradition and ceremony that we have found to be very helpful. Many of the programs and services offered these family members to take on a leadership role and be the voice of their loved one. Since services and gatherings are held provincially, most family members do not have the capacity to attend. If family members cannot attend, there is silence for the victims and a void in knowledge and awareness of the impact of this issue. And that's why, I mean, I guess, when we look at the pandemic situation, it has forced us to work in this virtual way, which has been challenging and presented a barrier for some people, but in some ways it has allowed us a wider reach to people. And where before maybe people couldn't attend, this is really an opportunity for people to attend that couldn't otherwise. So, I foresee that, I'm sure you all can, that in the future, I think that hybrid models will continue to work in this way to reach more people. There's not a lot of funding that is available to do this work. It has allowed Onwa to help many families raise awareness through the programs and services we offer. Families have been supported as they grieve and continue the grieving process. Onwa has supported families not only through service supports, but also through voicing concerns of family at provincial, national, and international levels. Onwa has acknowledged that families are in need of supports to hold space for their pain through the use of traditional ceremony. These days are moments in time and pass unknowingly for others, but for these families of MMIWG, time stops. The support is crucial to the family's well-being. Each victim has a story. Each family has their pain. MMIWG has become not only telling the very human story of loss and grief, but also the story of families and what they want us to know and hear, that their loved one, who they were in this world and what their lives contributed to this world, because far too often we know that the story that's told out there in media and social media, it's not about the purpose that this woman had in her community or this woman had in our personal lives, our families. It's so important for us to provide a platform for those stories to be told so that we can stop the dehumanization of our women. I don't know if any of you are familiar with, have attended any of the events that Onwa does host. So Poetry Night is one of them. So we have a poetry book. It's called Strong Hands Stop Violence. And this book is a collection of poems that people submit annually to this event. It's hosted every year on November 25th, which is the UN International Day of the Elimination of Violence Against Women. The event allows community to express themselves through poem and story and song. During this event, there's also a portion where we ask participants to share their painted handprints to create awareness and support the message in an effort to stop violence. So these orange and blue hands here, handprints that you see, we've collected those every year. And since pandemic, we've sent canvases out to people to, if they asked for them, to send them back their handprints back. This event incorporates oral, written, and visual art. As I said, it's held on November 25th of every year. It starts off the Orange the World campaign, which is the UN initiative of 16 days of activism against gender-based violence around the world. The poems that have been collected, you can find these on our website. So we've had 5 years of poetry books now, and those are all there on the website. Grandmother Earth Dress, some of you may be familiar with Grandmother Earth Dress, and some may not, but to tell you a little bit about her, the Grandmother Earth Dress is part of Onawa's bundle. She was brought here through vision and ceremony. The Grandmother Earth Dress is a healing dress that family members have been able to connect with and continue their healing paths. The main purpose of Grandmother Earth Dress is to honor and acknowledge murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. The dress is also to serve as a sacred item of healing for families as well as communities to commemorate their loved ones. She is meant for families to visualize their loved ones in a beautiful traditional regalia. On the day that Grandmother Earth Dress was brought to the National Inquiry and revealed for the first time, I was sitting at a table with some family members who had come there to give testimony. And literally, this is what that family shared, is the way their loved one was found with no clothes on. This was really a way for them to imagine her in this red jingle dress rather than the way she was found. It just really speaks to how impactful this can be. So this dress has 365 jingles representing that Indigenous women are confronted with violence every single day of the year on Turtle Island. The dress travels throughout the province to be there for families and communities. Of course, she hasn't during this pandemic, of course. It's never meant to be worn in this realm, but rather it's symbolic of women in the spirit world. The Mandala Rock Project. So this was a rock painting exercise, and it was an activity that uses art therapy to honor missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls into spirit. Each dot on the rock is intended to symbolize and honor positive memories or attributes of women that have been or are missing and murdered. The Mandala Rock Project encourages loved ones to somewhere sacred or special to commemorate their loved one. This dress was unveiled at the National Inquiry when they were here in Thunder Bay. She was intended for families as a healing tool, as well as served as a reminder to the commissioners that the stories of these women are to be treated with respect, kindness, and that they are sacred. The Ontario Native Women's Association fulfilled our inherent role as women and utilized a 3-part community action plan. So preparing community through transparency with community services to community. This required building relationships within community, mobilizing and meeting the needs of community, and ensuring aftercare and safety planning. At the forefront to begin healing was engagement with community. This process needs to occur to be proactive in mobilizing a community action plan to bring together our community partners. And the strategy began with connecting with elders and with community knowledge keepers for use in protocol of traditional healing and ceremony, and included other service providers such as crisis response, addiction and mental health services, child welfare services, police, and medical services. The approach ensured accountability, awareness, and transparency to provide services that were readily available for a seamless service continuum of care practice. Institutional-based intergenerational trauma maintains the disruption to relationships of family disconnection. The natural transfer of traditional knowledge of land, healing, community, and self. The Ontario Native Women's Association has observed a common reflection. The families have consistently stated that they needed a place to grieve and to identify the interconnection of their multiple loss, including identity, culture, and self-location. By providing Indigenous women, their families, and community with a safe, respectful space to honor and acknowledge their loved ones, we as a community create an opportunity for healing. The Ontario Native Women's Association Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls strategies have led to community initiatives and events that create a space for healing, culture, and to bring family and community together. And we do this through community gatherings, traditional healing and ceremony, having Grandmother Earth Dress present. She has traveled not only throughout the province of Ontario, but across Canada and actually to Sydney, Australia. A call for submissions to complete our own internal report that we will speak of here. And of course, we also have our Indigenous Victim and Family Liaison program that supports women and families. In addition to that, we host an annual powwow. We do plan to continue with our annual powwow when the pandemic allows for it. That event continues to be successful and led by Indigenous women and community at a grassroots level. And it's only by involving Indigenous women and amplifying their voices that we will further empower women take back their role as leaders and, more importantly, as medicine in our community. So this is the picture of the report, Reconciliation with Indigenous Women. It was released in 2020 and it outlines 13 key recommendations. And Onawa maintains that these recommendations must be reflected in the National Action Plan. This information can also be found on our website. The report calls for the National Action Plan to empower Indigenous women to create self-determined solutions using their knowledge, their experience, and their expertise, as well as by identifying and removing systemic racism. And each of the 13 recommendations has calls for actions. This is a graphic of the 13 grandmother moons. Of course, when we say grandmother moon, we don't simply mean mother to mom or dad. And of course, I probably don't need to share this in this forum, but it does need to be shared in other forums. But grandmother moon also refers to the true beauty of the turtle. A significant teaching of the turtle starts with the markings on its shell. The center has 13 large circles, which represent the 13 moons of the lunar calendar. And as I said, each moon carries a teaching. The 28 smaller circles, making the outer circle, represents the 28 days of each moon cycle. So here on this graphic is the 13 recommendations. And then the outer circle there, the 28 systems that Indigenous women interact with every day. In the report, we offer 13 recommendations based on decades of input from Indigenous women and previous research. Incorporating the traditional 13 grandmother moons teachings, these strengths-based recommendations and this holistic approach will foster independence, resilience, and environments in which Indigenous women and girls are respected, not dehumanized, and their safety is upheld and supported. These are the recommendations. And of course, as I said, there's action items under each of these recommendations. Number one, the safety of Indigenous women must be at the center of the National Action Plan of Indigenous Women. Two, restore Indigenous women's roles and responsibilities through the National Action Plan, invest in Indigenous women and our organizations, reclaim and restore the role of Indigenous women as mothers. So this, very much speaks to child welfare, invest in healing, restoration of Indigenous women's inherent rights, restoring balance within communities, addressing the many forms of violence that Indigenous women and girls face, moving beyond the legal system to justice, policy and research capacity, so revealing the story and understanding of its meaning, education, learning the truth, culturally appropriate services and systems that Indigenous women navigate, and accountability. I made a quick reference to the Indigenous Women Safety Table. So this was a safety table that was started by the Ontario Native Women's Association. It's guided by the 4 following principles. The focus of the work for the Indigenous Women's Safety Table is on Indigenous women and girls. The application of an intersectional lens and Indigenous gender-based analysis occurs at every step in the process. And that is the other thing that you're going to find in this report is Onawa's Indigenous gender-based analysis. A focus on Indigenous women's safety and healing is maintained throughout, and the work is led and driven by Indigenous women and Indigenous women's organizations. So in response to the lack of representation of Indigenous women-specific organizations at the National Action Plan's development structure, Onawa worked to bring together a table comprised of Indigenous women with varying backgrounds of both professional and personal expertise in supporting Indigenous women. The table will work to ensure that Onawa's 13 recommendations from the Reconciliation with Indigenous Women report are incorporated into the National Action Plan. The table will also provide advice and guidance to the core working groups to help ensure all of the recommendations in the final version of the National Action Plan related to Indigenous women's safety are implemented. The work is guided by the 4 principles that I just spoke of. That is it for the presentation, but I thought that I might also add, the work of Onawa is really on advocacy and systemic change, and that's this report informs the work that we need to do in the role of advocacy and trying to create systemic change. Also honoring Indigenous women's lives through the programs and services, the powwow, and also providing services and support. And how do we ensure Indigenous women's safety? By centering all policy and service conversations and actions around ensuring Indigenous women's safety, reinstating the Aboriginal Healing Foundation funding and programs to support healing and services for Indigenous women, families, and communities, restoring the inherent rights and responsibilities of Indigenous women so they can take up their leadership roles in family and community, by establishing a national missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls database and standardized death investigation processes, addressing the intersectionality of racism and sexism Indigenous women experience systemically in their day-to-day lives, ensuring Indigenous women have financial stability and can meet their basic needs of housing, food, and clothing, addressing the overrepresentation of Indigenous women within the court system and incarcerated settings, restore the role of Indigenous women as mothers, and reduce the number of Indigenous children and youth in the child welfare system. Reclaim and ensure Indigenous women's voices and expertise are centered, respected, and meaningfully included during the development and implementation of any and all matters impacting their lives.
I know there was one question earlier asking about where is Onawa providing these services? Is
Mm,
it every community across Ontario? What does that
mm.
different, does Onawa work with First Nations and treaty areas? What does that look like?
Onwa has 9 sites across the province, and in addition to that, we are a membership organization, so we have 11 affiliate organizations that are incorporated, and they provide services in their communities. We work with those 11 chapters, to get service to community. So there's for sure, 20 actual organizations across the province or places where services are provided in the province of Ontario. We do work with First Nations. We do some of our membership organizations are formed directly in First Nations. In addition to the 9 sites and the chapters, we also have 21 councils. So the councils are not incorporated members, but they work on issues that are specific to them and their community. And of course, those are different across the province.
We do have another question from the chat. As a family member, if they're looking for support, how do they reach out?
You can just phone Onwa. Phone number is on our website at onwa.ca. All of our contact information is there. There's a toll-free number that will connect you to any of our sites in the province. And if we don't have a site or location in your area, then we can still find a way to work with you to access supports and services.
I wanted to just mention that my sister was murdered in 1966. That's 56 years ago. Our family really never got any assistance. I knew of the Ontario Native Women's Association. All I wanted to say is I was talking to the OPP. They told me that they cannot close my sister's file until someone, whoever is related to the person that killed my sister, would clarify it and let them know, and then they could close the case. We still go through that even ever since this happened. Our
Mhm,
family's still grieving. We talk about it. Who do we talk to get any counseling if needed? Never heard anyone organization. Another thing that it really hits us on New Year's. My sister was a New Year's baby on New Year's Day. It's still hard on us.
mhm.
We, you know,
That is a really hard thing to deal with when you deal with the tragedy of your loved one being murdered. Absolutely. There is counseling available, and we continue to have programs and services and events that happen all year long. If you call us, I can work with you to find something that works for you. It's 1-800-667-0816.
I appreciate, Diane, you coming and sharing and coming to a space like this for some of the first times as well, because it just goes to show, right, that love never ends, that families miss their loved ones forever. and that they're willing to do this work however long that takes. And I hope you can see the love coming to you in the chat, Diane, and folks, lifting up your family and thinking of them too, because a lot of people here have had not the same experience, but a similar experience, and want to offer that kindness and support. And we also, just for Michele and Diane, that we do have a presentation today at 11 o'clock from the Family Information Liaison Unit, and they provide information on cases. They can advocate directly to agencies as well. So I think that will be very useful for your family as well, Diane, to listen to that presentation on the Family Information Liaison Unit.
It's not uncommon for Onawa and the FILU, the Family Liaison Unit, to coordinate services. Sometimes we can't accommodate all of the requests, so we partner to make sure that assistance is offered to people seeking supports. Most of the requests that I get is to go to different events or gatherings of traditional healing, I would say. That's the main thing that people call me to ask about is going to ceremony, traditional healing.
I attended a national inquiry here in Thunder Bay. I've gone for walks as for the missing murdered Aboriginal women and girls. But now I really can't do that now. I'm 76 years old. Even walking a little distance, I have problems breathing.
That's, I guess, one of the wonderful things about this way of doing things is you don't even have to leave your home to connect with people. We'll be having services at our Onawa site again when we get through this pandemic situation. But in the meantime, there are other supports. So I do, encourage you to give me a call, and together we'll find something that is helpful. And yes, for sure, the FILU is a support as well.
Miigwech.
Thank you for sharing, Diane. And we do have two folks with their hands raised. Just offer this floor to Jocelyn.
I live in Thunder Bay. I know Michele. I know. Before I speak, I do a prayer what I'm going to be speaking about today. Onawa is a vital resource for us women, children, family, extended family. I went there myself. I started going to the program because I haven't worked in a while. At one time, I was even asked if I was working there because some of those ladies I worked with, you know what I mean? So I'm just a client too. But anyway, what Michelle's talking about was very important. What I've been talking about also. This should be ongoing, not just once a year or whatnot. We are still dealing with pain regardless what programming we're dealing with. And teaching lodges and ceremonies is vital. Onawa did have the lodge there, and I'm hoping about a sweat in that, so a location, but there is a few around in the city, but some are hard to access, the ones that don't have vehicles. But for us to keep moving forward, I'm using myself as an example, is the healing process. I'm 65 years old, and I do seek out help too. At one time I didn't, but this has happened, like all this trauma that happened with me back, and then all these deaths I experienced within the last 40 years. I lost my son, 5 of my brothers, my nieces. I still get choked up. But like I said, we do need to, and I'm going to share with you now. I have to go to a healing lodge the 6 to 10, and that's why I say it's very important what turning us to reach out. That's somebody does for me. And they say, oh, you're still a woman, sure. We all have our hurts that we bury inside. But it's really important when you see within this walls or this group gathering, this meeting for dealing with pain. That's what it comes down to. And we talk about ceremonies, the importance in teaching lodges, that just talk. What are we going to do about it to help our people? I sit with our office And there is things happening because I'm glad we're taking care of our own people, our family members, our community, our own child welfare. I sit there because I was in 60s group because I know how those kids felt. We're not a number anymore, just like residential school. But I'd like to stress the fact of the importance for us to move forward and heal is we have to start having more ceremonies. Teaching lodges, it varies because I've been to many. Like I said, I'm still on my healing journey. It doesn't matter how old you are, how much you block it. I have to reach back in my past and bring it forward to to all these, what's keeping me, going it. I don't look at people now, you hear about them or whatnot, but I can see it in their eyes are very perceptive on that. But other than that, this is what I wanted to really stress you guys, a recommendation with this of Ontario ceremonies and teaching lodges. Kiki had one up here, but it's no longer available. Medical actually should be packed. And we're dealing with pain. But no, doesn't matter what office they come into, they're there for a reason. And, I was never judgmental when I started going to Onawa. I really loved your programming. I worked too for being again for years. And in the school system in special ed, I do have diplomas and that, but that's just paper. But what comes out of me is more important than what's on those papers and medals and whatnot I carry. So that's my kind of people. Like I'm not judging or anything. It's just that's how I see us elders in that book of wisdom, book of knowledge, book of respect. And I do all these. I'm glad Michelle brought that up. I did write in one of those Boys magazines about that. I am blood. It's in that. But I do many. I would like somebody to reach out here to help me write a book because I have that much already written, and it's all through about grief and all that, which could reach people, and I that need to hear these messages. And I don't take ownership for what I'm talking about there because I speak to my ancestors, I speak to Creator, and words that are coming out of me to you is what I'm supposed to say here today. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Jocelyn.
Want to thank Jocelyn and Diane and everyone who shared, and Michelle for sharing the important work that Onawa's doing, and just so grateful for you to come and share this space with us.
Miigwech, and thank you for inviting us to be part of this. I'm grateful to have been here, and I'm grateful to have been able to share some information with all of you, and enjoy the rest of this gathering. It's wonderful that you are doing this. Miigwech.